Hello, folks. Good to be with you again. I thought I might just take a few moments to share with you some thoughts from the second unit of IT strategy. This is chapters 4 through 6. I'm just going to do a brief 10, 15-minute review of some of the key things from the chapters, which I think are quite helpful. The authors bring up much more detail, of course, in the reading, and you can go look at their PowerPoint slides if you'd like to get some more information in preparation for your quizzes and so on. But here I just want to look at a few things and hopefully be a help. And if there's any questions, feel free to let me know in the Q&A forum, or actually you can do it through email as well. But the forums are helpful because that way others may have the same question and we can answer that question for everybody. So let's go ahead and take a look just briefly, just a few slides here in relation to the text readings. Now, they mentioned in chapter 4 the issue of IT business relationships, and that there are various, we might say, issues or challenges, characteristics that basically would say are part of IT business relationships in general today, although they are improving a bit. And so I think these are important to understand because one of the key things no doubt you've already noticed from our hefty case review, and also the other cases that you'll see in the coming weeks as your teams work on those, you'll see the issues of communication quite often. But certainly the hefty case, that was one of the key issues, and how we deal with those, of course, are important. So the challenges perhaps brought out, and there might be a few others as well, you would add to the list, and you can certainly add those in our discussion forums if you'd like. Obviously, the idea that IT owes us something, they need to continue to improve or prove themselves, they have to provide evidence that they're still needed, that kind of thing, or they should be kept, that kind of thing. Of course, that creates challenges for any IT group if they have to keep proving themselves. Doesn't the business have to prove itself as well then? That would be certainly a question that could be asked. And so we want to mention that. And business is not involved in IT quite often. And though that's improving some, organizations are recognizing they cannot just let IT go off on its own and do its own thing. That business and IT are very integrated, we might say. There's intricacies between them that are extremely important today to deal with. And then, of course, the way they communicate, there are communication problems between the two, and this can lead to disconnects. So we can have an overly, we might say, IT or technical perspective, or we can have an overly business perspective that sort of eliminates IT. We can't think of anything technical, right? And of course, these are both faults. But they do have to have a business strategy, a business acumen about them, a business discussion that so people can fully understand it. And then, of course, change in business expectations. That is, business often will say, well, IT, we need this, but then next week it's something else, or perhaps the next month it's something else. And so business, of course, is constantly changing, but also their expectations change as a result. And this can cause many problems for IT. And IT can get the blame for such things in relationships, when in reality the changing business requirements are causing problems for IT. So that's one of the issues. Then many assumptions are made too. That is, on both sides of the fence, we might say, IT and business make assumptions about one another. And so the authors bring out some of that issue as well. And they may name it differently. This is just my perspective on nomenclature here. And then IT influences all levels of the organization. That is basically, it's not just the issue of executives. You saw this in the Hefty case a little bit, that they basically had a bunch of executives that were sort of making decisions. They had a few folks beneath them, like Jenny and others that we've talked about, and they were, or discussed, and they were sort of in between, but that was about it. Everybody else seemed to be there were the staff, and they didn't seem to be that much included other than to take care of meetings or whatever that no one else wanted to go to. And so that seemed to cause some problems communication-wise. And so we see, again, that case would also have some great relevance to these chapters as well. In addition to the issue of IT value and so on, certainly communication is going to become key, collaboration and so on. So we have to understand IT is not just a thing for the senior managers or middle managers, but also for the organization as a whole, and people have to understand it. Now, there are some characteristics of good relationships. I've made these 4 points, and they are very similar, if not the same, as what the authors bring out. That the issue of good relationship is that people see IT as competent, right? That basically they can see that the work gets done well, that they have a good understanding of the business. All these kind of things can be helpful. And if they don't see IT as having a good understanding of the business, not able to relate well, and so on, then of course they're going to see them as incompetent. They can't do the work. They don't understand us, right? This kind of thing. But you see, IT doesn't need to be competent in it, but of course business has to be competent as well. That is, if IT sees business as incompetent, that is, they can't seem to get their own act together and so on. They don't even understand their own business. Well, then that, of course, won't do too well either. So it goes both ways, although I've mentioned here, usually the key issue is IT competence from a business perspective. Certainly the other way can also be important. And then credibility. And credibility means that they have confidence in the folks, right? That they'll get the job done, right? And what they say is something that is reality, right? That they're not making things up and that kind of thing. So this also relates to trust. I might as well mention that one as well. The fourth one there says trust, and trust, of course, is the idea that it relates to credibility, but says, you know what? If I say something, I'll do it, right? And so I can be trusted to do what I say I'm going to do again, and to also say things that are honest and open and so on. And that leads us to interaction as well, right? That there's good interaction between business and IT, that they're honest and open with one another. We'll mention this again in a moment. But this idea that they interact well, they communicate well, there's this constant desire to let folks know where things are at, right? Rather than, again, like many times is done, here IT, here's a project, and we'll see you when you get it all done, right? And business don't want to be involved at all from that point on. Well, that's a very difficult situation. And so interaction is required as well to have good relationships. There are some challenges to good communication, of course, and it doesn't mean it's all personal fault or that it's individuals' fault. There are some things that are happening in organizations that we just have to be dealt with. And so the changing complexity of IT, for instance, can challenge good communication. And things are getting more complex, and the technologies are just marvelous and so on. But how do we, from an IT perspective, help business understand how they can be used without going over their heads? And hiring techies, of course, is a challenge today. That is, it's easy to say, well, we'll hire some technical people, but are they able now to interact with the business and communicate and help out and so on? These are important issues you'll see come out in your cases again. And so these things should help you begin thinking about how you might apply what you're learning to cases and also your own final project as well. And then, of course, the organizational structure. We've already mentioned this, right? The issue of it's not just senior level anymore that IT takes care of things. We recognize it's all levels, right? And so the organizational structure can actually prove very difficult for good communication. And so having a good organizational structure, as the authors bring out, can be very helpful. And then just the communication process as a whole, the whole issue of going from one end of the communication to the other, that is what one side stating actually what the other side is understanding, right? And so you have to make sure that the results match the inputs, as we might say, in the communication process. And so the channel may be corrupting the communication, right? And so that's important to understand as well. And then, of course, attitude. And attitude is a marvelous thing, of course, a positive attitude and having a good attitude about communication and recognize things are going to go wrong sometimes. And can we help one another through those things? I remember actually back a ways, I would speak at some conferences on this whole issue of good communication and professional development and things like this. And in that same conference, I would actually meet up with a fella. He had a session as well. Keith Harrell was his name. In fact, he passed away just a few years back. Maybe it's about 7 or 8 years ago now. He had done a video, Attitude is Everything. And he would make a presentation that really was just a motivational type of situation. He was a motivational speaker and had a great attitude about life and sharing things and so on. And I think I may still have his video. I think I'd gotten it one time. I can't remember if I still have it or not. But anyway, he had to say attitude is everything. Well, you may not agree with his perspective on that, but certainly attitude plays a very important role in how we see IT, how we see organizations, how we see our own careers and our own lives. Attitude will play an extremely important role because it affects our emotions and so on. So we bring out these things about communication from the chapter 4, and hopefully these are a help to you. Look at the details, and again, feel free to communicate about these things in our discussion forums. And so I've already mentioned, finally, as we look at the summary of it all from chapter 4, we have the outcomes. Again, I've already mentioned it. At the end, what happens? We have the interpersonal aspect. That is, we have to recognize, or at least an organization does, that these are interpersonal things. There are different kinds of people, different cultures, and so we have to know that up front. And the ability to share, the idea, not just, hey, here's a project, we already talked about this, but the continual sharing of information is important. And then having maturity. Organizations that are mature often will have a great process in place, as we've already mentioned the issue of process. So these are just summarizing, perhaps in another way, some of the things we've already mentioned. And so this is the issue of communication. Now, there are 4 key T's. They call this T-level communication in the chapter. Translation. Can it be understood, right? That is, how do we translate the technical things to business things so the technical people can understand it, and so on. Tailoring it. Do we look at our audience? And that's very important. I remember I used to do a session on the 7 habits of highly effective speakers. And the issue of looking at the audience, it was actually essential. Because if you don't know your audience, you're not going to be able to communicate very well. You'll do it in a general way, and you might be successful for some people, but how about the audience as a whole? And then transparency, being honest and open. I've already mentioned that, of course. Again, some overlap between these key things that are brought out in the text. And then, of course, thinking through. That is, not just talking, that's certainly important, not just speaking, but really listening with the intent of understanding what is being said by the other party, as it were, right? The other group, or the other team, or whatever it might be. And so this is important to see. But now let's move on then to our next area, the issue of leadership, the importance of IT leaders. And so we have to just keep in mind that there are some characteristics of good IT leaders, and probably you might say of leaders in general, not just IT leaders. And so we see here we have, and I put the word understands these things. Okay, now your author is bringing that a little different in the text, and certainly read what they have to say. But as I thought through it, I'm saying an IT leader understands things about himself or herself, understands leadership and what it's all about. Not just management, but leadership, right? Because there are some differences. Understands business and how a business operates and the key functions of a business and things like this. And understands the business perspective of the particular organization they're in, for instance, healthcare or perhaps manufacturing, whatever it might be. They understand organizations in general, how they operate. They understand the working environment. And so the issue of, what kind of environment are we in, and how communications work in that kind of environment, and so on, and how will they, so the social aspect, we might say, of things. And then understand resource usage and using them well, right? And whether it's financial or perhaps physical plant or whatever it might be, they are able to handle, or human resources, of course, they are able to use them well. And we then have understanding flexibility. The good leaders understand, what things go wrong, right? And so they're flexible. They understand that they need to be ready with a plan B. They have to understand that, we may have to take a different track, that kind of thing. And so good leaders, exhibit these kind of characteristics and understanding of these things. And so I bring these before you, and there may be others as well. And the authors might actually present some other ones as well, or at least slightly different ones that are slightly different from here. But hopefully this is a help to you. Now, when we look at IT leaders, we also see 4 things here that they value. I call them the value aspects of things. And then I think your authors bring out the idea that at the top of the pyramid is value. But they value values, is what I say here. That is, basically, they value things. Right? They have a certain set of values they use, and they are connected with how the business wants to run as well. And they value trust. Well, we talked about trust in relation to communication. Well, obviously, leaders value trust. And then we talk about value in communication. Well, we already had a whole chapter on communication. But now we're saying good IT leaders value communication. Getting information, giving out information. Again, we already talked about the issue of honesty and openness and so on. And then they value accountability, is that they recognize they need to be accountable and they hold others accountable. And they don't try to always pass the buck along, right? As we might say in our idiom, in our language today. But they try to hold others accountable, but they also hold themselves accountable and really fess up when things go wrong, when they are accountable for the mess up, right? That kind of thing. No doubt you all do that as well. So that's a little bit on how the authors bring out this issue of building leaders. And so we would suggest that in this section, in this unit, we've looked at the issue of communication, and 2 chapters pretty much on that whole issue of communication, of course, and the issues involved with it and the like. And you can take a further look at that. Again, that's chapters 4 and 5, where it talks about the strong business relationships, and then the communication piece of it as well. And then, of course, we mentioned the issue of IT leaders and how we build them. The authors mentioned building them from the bottom up. So with that all in mind, we leave that to you to think about and, again, use. And we hope this is a help. Just this little review is a help to you to get you started as you read through the text and perhaps look at the PowerPoint slides from the authors themselves. And we hope they're a help to you. Again, feel free to contact me if there's any questions, issues. We want you to be successful, and we look forward to your good contributions to the class. Have a great day.